the contours of reaching an agreement quickly are known. And what are they? They are that Ukraine will be permanently neutral. In other words, it will not join NATO.
So the internet is abuzz with people wondering how to end U.S. involvement in Ukraine, how to stop the fighting there. But as Jeffrey Sachs says here, and he was recently on Judge Napolitano's podcast, it's been well known what can lead to the end of the war and the only hope for peace in Ukraine. This is just a teaser. He lays out a few other things, so let's just get into it and react.
I came home from Moscow, you know how long the flight is, and learned that Secretary of State Rubio and National Security Advisor Walls claimed that they've negotiated a ceasefire with President Zelensky, and, quote, the ball is now in Russia's court. One of the questions that we put to Foreign Minister Lavrov was whether or not there could be such a ceasefire. He looked right at me and said, why would we do that? Doesn't the American team know that there are 4 or 5 conditions that President Putin has laid out regularly, consistently, systematically from the beginning that would have to be met in order to end this war, and that those conditions were included in the agreement between Kyiv and Moscow before the agreement was disrupted by Boris Johnson and Joe Biden?
Well, I think the U.S. Must understand that this is not about a ceasefire, as good as that would be in a broader context. This is about ending a war. And what we don't know about the discussions that took place in Riyadh is what was said about ending the war. Maybe it's possible that the Ukrainian side said, yes, we accept conditions that could lead to the end of the war, and that those are being communicated privately with the Russian government.
And by the way, Lavrov is always going to say, just before they enter negotiations, no, we're not going to have a ceasefire. Meanwhile, the government could secretly want that. I mean, 100 to 150,000 or so Russian troops have died in this war too. There's been attrition there, so that's not necessarily indicative of thinking Russia would just totally reject one, but it's absolutely how you have to posture as a diplomat when you have the upper hand, which Russia clearly does.
It may be that they said no such thing. We don't really know at this moment what occurred in Riyadh. It would be naive, more naive than I think is the case, actually. That this was simply an announcement for a 30-day pause. You know, what's happening on the battlefield is that Russia is winning on the battlefield. In fact, there's a major operation underway in the last few days in the Kursk region of Russia, which the Ukrainian forces had entered a few months ago, which they wanted to hold as a bargaining chip, so-called, for a final settlement. And the Russian forces are clearing out the Ukrainians by the hour right now. So Ukraine is on the defensive. It's retreating. Russia would not stop this effort for no reason. The only way that it would stop would be if the Americans communicate with the Russians that, yes, behind closed doors, the Ukrainians have recognized what is the way to end the conflict. Now, I think on that, there's no mystery. There has been no mystery since April 2022. I would say there's been no mystery since 2015. Indeed, one could go back even before that. What do I mean by all of this? As you mentioned, on April 15th, 2022, there was a draft agreement for ending the conflict close to being signed by Russia and Ukraine. We have that draft agreement. That's not hidden from view. The New York Times published it in 2024. It's a very plausible end to the war. It could have been achieved. It could have been achieved almost 3 years ago, and a million casualties ago on the Ukrainian side.
And this is totally true, by the way. In fact, even the chief of NATO at the time, Jens Stoltenberg, boasted about this. He said that Putin just wanted us to put it in writing that we wouldn't expand NATO by the inclusion of Ukraine. And not only did we reject that outright, he boasted about this. Putin got war from us. So this was published. So anyone saying that it's just pro-Putin, pro-Russian propaganda, that NATO expansion was a major issue for this war, read that draft treaty. That's what Putin wanted in 2022. And we know that Ukraine was a red line for, as far as Russia's concerned, Ukraine and NATO for a long time. And this came out from the famous leaked Niet Means Niet memo, where William Burns basically told his boss at the time, Condoleezza Rice, that that was the truth, that all factions in Russia viewed Ukraine's inclusion into NATO as a red line.
Probably 1 million Ukrainians have died or been grievously wounded since that accord was pushed aside by Biden's team and by Boris Johnson. They told the Ukrainians, keep fighting. This is what was such a disastrous foreign policy by Biden. The UK is so consistently disastrous in its advice, I don't even expect better. I wince at how ridiculous the UK approach is, but the US should have known better, could have done better, could have enabled a peace already about 3 years ago. So we know what the contours of the agreement would be. And in that interview, it's a terrific interview, extremely informative, extremely interesting, by Foreign Minister Lavrov. He notes that one of the points of the agreement in April 2022 was some territorial concession by Ukraine up to that point of the fighting. In fact, he said now it is worse for Ukraine. Ukraine fought on for 3 years and they've lost relative to where they were before. They've lost legally, juridically, and on the battlefield. But the contours of reaching an agreement quickly are known. And what are they? They are that Ukraine will be permanently neutral. In other words, it will not join NATO. NATO will not be dangled as something to happen in 5 years or 10 years or 15 years. Ukraine will be neutral. This was the sensible position for the last 30 years. The U.S. could not take common sense. The second is there will be territorial adjustments. There wouldn't have been before the coup in 2014 that the United States participated in. There wouldn't have been any at all. There wouldn't have been territorial loss in eastern Ukraine, in the Donbas region, or what is called Lugansk and Donetsk, because the Minsk agreement that the U.S. and Ukraine dissed, they signed and then they dissed it, didn't call for territory to go to Russia, but it called for constitutional autonomy of the ethnic Russian regions of eastern Ukraine.
Yeah, so Sachs is right here too. It is such a utopian pipe dream to come out and say, well, Crimea is part of Ukraine, but let's still have a peace with Russia. Or all the Donbas provinces are part of Ukraine, but yeah, we want peace. Well, obviously they do, but that's a long gone opportunity that could have been secured long ago, before Maidan in 2014, before the U.S. interacted and was involved in the toppling of the democratically elected government of Ukraine headed by Yanukovych, who did run on neutrality. But neutrality is never enough for the American empire.
Well, they lost that opportunity. In 2022, there were some concessions based on where the contact lines were at that point. But now things have gotten worse. So there will be these territorial adjustments. And the third part of the agreement that was already reached on April 15, 2022, by the way, based on a communique that was jointly issued on March 29th, 2022, which also people can find online, is that there will be security guarantees for Ukraine. And I say rather straightforwardly, because it's the way that things should work in this world, put them through the UN Security Council. That's what it's there for. And so this is the third point. Permanent neutrality, some territorial border adjustments that reflect the events of the last 11 years, actually, and security guarantees for Ukraine, in my view, under the UN auspices. That's how to.
That's an important distinction, too, because as an American, I sure as hell don't want to subsidize that, any security guarantee. Every country wants a security guarantee, but the U.S. has been subsidizing the military security of way too many nations for way too long. We have military men and women all across the world, hundreds of bases, and what good has it done us? Just gotten us a ton of enemies.
Reach peace. Really, we were there on April 15th, 2022. We could be there immediately. That's nothing to do with the ceasefire, except if in the closed room in Riyadh, Ukraine said, yeah, okay, that makes sense. We were about to sign in April 2022. We'll sign now. Maybe they said that. Maybe that's what's being communicated. But if it's just a ceasefire, it's not going to happen.
Are you of the view, Professor Sachs, that President Zelensky would risk his tenure in his job? I don't want to say in office. It's not a legal job that he has anymore. And maybe even his life, if he were to show some rational behavior and cease the military conflagration. You know, this crew that regulates him from his right would kill him?
Look, I don't know about his personal safety, but I could say something about his political term. It would likely end. He, like a head of state, represented a platform and a position, and terms come to an end. We don't run countries for the sake of our rulers. We don't run countries for the sake of our heads of government. Our heads of government are to be for the sake of the people, not the other way around. That's a principle that was established rightly in the United States in 1776, July 4th, in a very well-written document by Thomas Jefferson, which we call the Declaration of Independence. It was enshrined in the U.S. Constitution in the convention in 1787. With all respect to President Zelensky, you know, terms come to an end.
And this is such a great question by the judge, I think, because it is true that Zelensky aligned with a lot of right-wing forces in his country to embark on this plan, which has been a miserable and, failed plan, led to maybe, 1 million dead in Ukraine. There's lots of different estimates on that. And in doing so, he had to align with lots of nationalist Ukrainians, some of which, but not all, were Nazis. Some of them were aligned with the Azov battalion and that kind of ideology that it represents. So I think this is a great question, and Sachs's answer is so perfect here. We don't embark on policy for the sake of individuals in our country. That includes the president, and that includes my country too. We have to look at the America First benefit. This administration talks America First all the time, but the American taxpayers always seem to lose out.
He's ruling under martial law. I don't know, maybe he runs for election and he wins. Okay, that's one thing. But the question of his political term is, frankly, of no particular interest to me, and I don't think should be of any particular interest to anybody. We don't run countries for the sake of individuals. And what we know from both the logic of the situation, the tragedy of the situation, and the opinion surveys in Ukraine is that the Ukrainians want peace. They say so. Peace, even with territorial concessions. How do they express that right now? By trying to flee from people that are grabbing them off the streets and sending their deaths in the front lines because they can't vote on it. This is a martial law regime. So this is, I hope nothing personally happens to him. If that's a risk, he should figure out some way to leave or do something. But I'm not giving him personal advice.
Understood.
But at a political level, we cannot run international affairs for the sake of an incumbent. We need to address the needs of people. We need to address security. We need to address global peace. That's what this is all about.
So Sachs just nails it here, and this is why he's one of the greatest minds in American foreign policy as far as I'm concerned. Not only is it known the formula for peace, it's what Russia wanted in its draft treaty, but this has been laid out for so many years and so many successive administrations. And Zelensky's gambit in the White House was such a disaster for him in so many ways. But I think the reason he did that is because he was feeling pressure from right-wing groups. Like, you can't get out of this. We know there's a new administration whose rhetoric is like, get out of the war, stop people dying. Trump's kind of waffled on that a few times, but they don't want that. So I think that that's why Zelensky pulled out all the stops in that risky gambit, which, again, was a miserable failure. You could even see the Ukraine ambassador that was with him in the room in tears because she knew at that point. There's video on that. So anyway, I want to hear what you guys think. Is Sachs right about this? Is this the only hope for peace, to adhere to the 3 kind of recommendations that he articulated in this? Let me know in the comments below. And until we meet next time, Liberty Vault mantra: no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, no more empire. See you guys on the next one.